I'm Toshiro Yanagihara from PCI Group Japan. Today, I would like to introduce 5 perspectives to help you understand the new PCI DSS version 4 requirements. This topic focuses on an intermediate concept that connects goals and new requirements of PCI DSS version 4. I believe this topic will be helpful to understand the new requirements in version 4, especially for small businesses in APAC countries. I really appreciate PCI SSC and BSI Group Japan for giving me the opportunity to conduct a presentation on version 4. Please note the views expressed in the presentation are based on my opinions and not those of BSI Group Japan and PCI SSC. At first, please let me introduce myself and BSI Group Japan briefly. My name is Toshiro Yanagihara, and I am in charge of P2PE and 3DS Product Manager and APAC PCI Scheme Manager at BSI Group Japan. I have conducted the study of version 4 more than 3 years and developed BSI Japan's version 4 training materials. My employer, BSI Group Japan, is one of the most experienced and knowledgeable QSA company in Japan and APAC countries. It has provided over 15 years of work experience in PCI DSS assessment in Japan and APAC countries. It has operated its own PCI scheme with its BSI Group companies in the APAC region. The PCI-related assessment services is provided with BSI Japan as a prime QSA and BSI Group company in the APAC region as the subcontractor QSA. Firstly, let me confirm 4 goals for PCI DSS version 4 quoted from at a glance PCI DSS version 4. The goals include continue to meet the security needs of the payment industry, promote security as a continuous process, increase flexibility for organizations using different methods to achieve security objectives, enhance validation methods and procedures. The goals reflect all important concepts for version 4 at a highly elevated level. However, I'm afraid it is slightly difficult to understand the relation between the goals and the new requirements. Secondly, let me confirm the number of new requirements per principal requirement in version 4. The total number of the new requirements is 64 and corresponds to a quota of total number of requirements, 280. However, the number of new requirements varies so much per principal requirement. The largest number of new requirements is 14 in principal requirement 12. The lowest number of new requirements is 0 in principal requirement 1. Please note a quota of total requirements are new requirements, and the difference exists in the number of new requirements per principal requirements. This slide shows 5 perspectives that functions as an intermediate concept that bridges goals and the 64 new requirements. 5 perspectives are derived from common characteristics after analyzing the 64 new requirements. 5 perspectives include protection of account data, response to threats, external risks, response to internal risks and environmental changes, flexibility, improved security maturity. On the next slide, I'd like to supplement the 2 layers are inherent in 5 perspectives. This slide shows the two layers inherent in 5 perspectives. The first layer, PCI DSS direct controls, consists of new requirements that will directly respond to newly identified threats, attacks, and risks. It includes 3 perspectives represented in the top half of the slide. The second layer, PCI DSS indirect controls, scope and resource management, consists of new requirements to support and protect direct controls. It includes 2 perspectives represented in the bottom half of the slide. Let me explain each perspective in more detail, one by one, from the next slide. This slide shows the overview of protection of account data. This perspective includes 9 requirements to directly protect account data during storage, transmission, or deletion. Please note that protection target is different for each new requirement. For example, PAN, primary account number, or SAD, sensitive authentication data, or account data. For all new requirements in this perspective, the effective date has been set as March 31st, 2025. Let us move on to the next slide and review requirements to examples included in this perspective. This slide shows 3 requirements to examples. For requirement 332, it states temporary storage of SAD. In versions 3.2.1, storage of SAD is basically prohibited, but in version 4, temporary storage of SAD has come to be permitted under some conditions. Also, please note this requirement is not eligible for the customized approach. For requirement 3512, it states the use of disk level or partition level encryption is limited only to removable electric media, in fact. However, disk level or partition level encryption technologies, for example, Oracle database, SQL Server, are used in many clients at present. In this case, they will be additionally required to render PAN unreadable via another mechanism such as truncation or data level encryption mechanisms according to requirement 351. For requirement 421, it states the maintenance of validity of certificates used to safeguard PAN during transmission over open network. Please note this requirement intends to ensure session level safety when transmitting PAN. This slide shows the overview of response to threats and external risks. This perspective includes 10 requirements to detect and prevent malware or external attacks. Important keywords include phishing attacks, web-based attacks, skimming attacks, response to malware, payment page tampering, covert malware communication channels, POI, point of interaction device inspections. For all new requirements in this perspective, the effective date has been set as March 31st, 2025. This slide shows 4 requirement examples. For requirement 541, it states the necessity of mechanisms against phishing attacks. Against phishing attacks, 2 different requirements have been added in version 4. One on technical controls, this requirement, and the other on awareness training in requirement 12631. For requirement 643, it states the protection of all payment page scripts. Please note this requirement intends to protect all payment page scripts executed in the consumer's browser by checking their authority, integrity, and necessity. For requirement 11.6.1, it states the protection of payment pages by using change and tamper detection mechanism against web skimming attacks. Please note this requirement intends to monitor active payment pages in the consumer's browser to detect and report on any changes of payment pages. For requirement 12.6.3.1, it states the necessity of inclusion of new threats to CDE in security awareness training. This requirement stipulates awareness training against phishing attacks and social engineering. This slide shows the overview of response to internal risks and environmental changes. This perspective has 23 requirements that can be categorized into two types. First type includes revised controls for password, MFA, multi-factor authentication, and authenticating to scan. Second type includes new controls for account management of application and system accounts. For most of the new requirements in this perspective, the effective date has been set as March 31st, 2025. However, please note only requirement 12.9.2 is an exception that is required to be applied immediately for all version 4 assessments. Requirement 12.9.2 stipulates TPSP's, third-party service providers, responsibility for supporting their customers. Important keyword includes account management, password, MFA, response to vulnerability, authenticated scan, audit log reviews, critical security control systems, customer support by TPSP, multi-tenant service provider. This slide shows 6 requirement examples. For requirement 7.2.4, it states the necessity of periodic review for all user accounts and related access privileges. Please note, this requirement intends to prevent the use of excessive access rights that might remain as before by malicious users through reflecting job responsibility change, termination, system function change in a timely manner. For requirement 8.3.6, it states minimum level of complexity for passwords when used as an authentication factor. Please note this requirement, a minimum length of 12 characters and containing both numeric and alphabetic characters, is applied when passwords or passphrases are used as authentication factor in accordance with requirement 8.3.1. For requirement 8.4.2, it states the necessity of multi-factor authentication for all access into the CDE. Please note the definition of multi-factor authentication. It means a method of authenticating a user whereby at least 2 factors are verified, including something the user has, such as smart card, and something the user knows, such as password, or something the user is or does, such as biometric elements. Using one factor twice, for example, using 2 separate passwords, is not considered multi-factor authentication. For requirement 8.5.1, it states the appropriate implementation of multi-factor authentication systems. I think this requirement belongs to the indirect control to protect multi-factor authentication. Please note the first bullet of this requirement stipulates that the MFA system is not susceptible to replay attack. Replay attack is defined as an attack that involves the capture of transmitted authentication or access control information and its subsequent retransmission with the intent of producing an unauthorized effect or gaining unauthorized access according to NIST Glossary, National Institute of Standards Technology. For requirement 10411, it states the use of automated mechanisms for audit log reviews. Please note this requirement intends that automated mechanisms are used to perform log review, including manual method. For requirement 11312, it states authenticated scanning. Please note authenticated scanning intends to detect vulnerabilities that unauthenticated scans cannot detect and attackers may leverage. This slide shows the overview of flexibility. Flexibility means that an entity is permitted to determine necessary controls or frequency against applicable requirements based on its will and risk environment under strict conditions. This perspective includes two requirements on targeted risk analysis for periodic controls and customized controls. The effective date of the requirement 1231 for periodic controls has been set as March 31st, 2025. However, the effective date of the requirement 1232 for customized controls has been set as immediately. This slide shows two requirements included in this perspective. Both requirements stipulate targeted risk analysis in common. Targeted risk analysis is defined as, for PCI DSS purposes, a risk analysis that focuses on a specific PCI DSS requirements of interest. Targeted risk analysis is categorized in indirect controls. Please pay attention to the difference from a traditional enterprise-wide risk assessment, excluded from version 4. For requirement 1231, please note this requirement is focused on frequency. This requirement stipulates actual frequency for performing controls is determined through targeted risk analysis and performed on the frequency by an entity. Also, this requirement will be applied to 9 requirements on the next slide. For requirement 1232, please note this requirement intends to confirm customized controls meet the objective of a PCI DSS requirement. This slide shows 9 requirements that stipulates periodic controls subject to requirement 1231. These requirements are categorized into direct controls, and the target of controls are different for each requirement. For example, for requirement 5321, controls for the protection of malware are mentioned. For requirement 7251, 863, controls for the access by application and system accounts are mentioned. For requirement 95121, controls for the POI device inspections are mentioned. In summary, you can see the most suitable frequency should be determined for the 9 periodic controls through targeted risk analysis. Let us move on to the next slide. This slide shows the overview of improved security maturity. This perspective has 20 requirements in total. 11 requirements are applied immediately, and 9 requirements will be applied after March 31st, 2025. The requirements in this perspective aim to install PCI DSS indirect controls and supported and protect PCI DSS direct controls. The target of PCI DSS indirect controls are PCI DSS scope and resources. For example, site, location, people, organization, knowledge, process, technology, and periodic controls, customized controls. Important keywords include roles and responsibility, risk analysis, PCI DSS scope review, resource review, security awareness program, security incident response plan. This slide shows 16 requirement examples. For requirement 2.1.2 to 11.1.2, including 10 requirements in total. They state roles and responsibilities for each principal requirement. For requirement 12.3.3, it states that the review process of cryptographic cipher suites and protocols in use. Please note this requirement stipulates an up-to-date inventory of all cryptographic cipher suites and protocols is documented and monitored for continued viability at least once every 12 months. For requirement 12.3.4, it states the review process of hardware and software technologies. Please note this requirement stipulates hardware and software technologies are reviewed to remediate or remove their vulnerabilities at least once every 12 months. For requirement 12.5.2, it states the PCI DSS scope annual confirmation. Please note this requirement has no grace period and is applied immediately for all version 4 assessments. For requirement 12.6.2, it states the review process of security awareness program. Please note this requirement stipulates the security awareness program is reviewed and updated as needed, reflecting the current threat environment. For requirement 12.10.5, it states the addition of security alert from payment pages to the security incident response plan. Please note the security alert for payment page from the change and tamper detection mechanism has become subject to security alert monitoring systems. For requirement 12.10.7, it states the necessity of incident response procedures upon detection of PAN. Please note this requirement stipulates incident response procedures are documented if clear text PAN is detected where it is not expected. Lastly, I would like to introduce 2 considerations for version 4 initial assessment before March 31st, 2025. The first consideration is on introduction section changes that might be overlooked. Introduction section changes consist of 3 topics. In this slide, I'd like to mention only new time frame guidelines. The other 2 topics will be followed on the next slide. In new time frame guidelines, the description of each time frame was clarified. For example, every 3 months is described as at least once every 90 to 92 days, or on the nth day of each 3rd month. Also, please pay attention to the description of significant change. It says any changes that have potential impact on the security of the CDE. The second consideration is on 13 new requirements that have no grace period and will be applied immediately. Roles and responsibilities, it includes roles and responsibilities, 10 requirements, annual PCI DSS scope confirmation, customer support by TPSP, targeted risk analysis for customized approach. This slide shows the two supplemental topics on introduction section changes. Firstly, regarding CDE definition expansion, please see the underlined part of the definition. It says system components that may not store, process, or transmit CHD or SAD, but have unrestricted connectivity to system components within CDE. For example, newly added system components to CDE may include authentication servers, remote access servers, logging servers, and so on. I assume it is required to consider sufficiently the impact of this change during annual PCI DSS scope confirmation. The second topic is on some requirements that the target was changed from cardholder data to account data. I assume additional investigation of the impact may be necessary along with annual PCI DSS scope confirmation. My presentation is over. If you need more details of today's topics, please consult Appendix G, Glossary of Terms, and Guidance column in related requirements in PCI DSS version 4 standard. I hope this presentation will help you understand the new requirements of version 4 and you will succeed in maintaining compliance. Thank you very much for your attention.